Today we're going to discuss the Rebbe's approach to an attitude towards the modern state of Israel and the peace process. The Rebbe has often been accused of being an anti-Zionist and an extreme Zionist. And the truth is that you cannot slot the Rebbe into any category. I would use the term trans-Zionist, a much higher type of Zionism, because the word Zion, Zion, is a reference to the city of Yerushalayim, more specifically to the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple. And the Rebbe is certainly very much devoted not just to the Holy Temple in Yerushalayim, but to the entire land of Israel, Eretz Yisrael. But the Rebbe never stepped foot physically into Eretz Yisrael. And we're not going to go into the reasons the Rebbe gave and others who've speculated about it. That's not the point of my talk. What I'd like to talk about is the Rebbe's connection to Israel was as tight as one could possibly imagine. The Rebbe breathed the air of Israel. He was intimately involved with every segment of the leadership, of the population, of academia, and certainly of the religious and educational segments of the Jewish community in Israel. There was a book that was published not too long ago that detailed from a secular writer the connections the Rebbe had to all segments of the Israeli government, the Mossad, the secret agencies, and was aware of the most intimate goings-on. I remember when General Sharon, at that time he was a general, who had an audience with the Rebbe, and when he came out, he said that he spoke to the Rebbe about military strategy. He said, I know the Rebbe didn't go to a military academy, but he was well-versed in military strategy as any general. The Rebbe displayed and exhibited over the years tremendous knowledge of, commitment to, and love of, and passion for the land of Israel. In fact, that writer, that secular, so-called secular writer, when he was asked why he thought the Rebbe was so involved with Israel, he said he knows that it's only because of the Rebbe's great concern for the welfare of the Jewish people and of the land of Israel. And there's nothing else that motivated the Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov taught us that where is a person, where does he really exist? That's where his will is. If you want to be in Israel right now and you really have a strong desire, your soul is extended all the way to Israel. You are there. Conversely, and sadly, a Jew who lives in Israel but longs to be in the United States, to be part of the Hollywood culture and all the other American cultural destinations, then physically he might be in Israel, and there's something to be said about that, but he's really not in Israel. He's really where his will is. The Rebbe was always in Israel. There's a story told by Professor Branifer, a famous Russian emigre, scientist, who was asked by the Rebbe to establish a neighborhood called Shamir in Jerusalem for Soviet scientists. They should have residences, and they should also have laboratories in which to do their research. So he had some questions about which neighborhood. He brought a map of Jerusalem, knowing that the Rebbe was never there, to point out the different neighborhoods, and the Rebbe would decide which one was most suited. The Rebbe put the map on the side, and the Rebbe started talking about traffic patterns in some of the neighborhoods, and he knew it intimately. And there are many stories like this that demonstrate the Rebbe's keen knowledge, just knowing the geography of Israel and the history of Israel, of course, and things going on both on the government level and also on the social and individual levels. So anything that we say about the Rebbe's approach to the land of Israel can be only motivated by love, passion, and concern for Israel, the people of Israel, the Jewish people, and yes, even the non-Jewish population of Israel. And I'll get into that in a moment. The Rebbe would often reiterate the point that is made by Rashi. Rashi is the primary principal commentator of the Torah. In his very first comment on the book of Genesis, on the very first verse of Genesis, on the very first word Rashi says that the reason why the Torah begins with the story of creation and it's followed up by the story of Noah and the patriarchs, the matriarchs, Joseph, his brothers, and then continuing in Exodus until it reaches the actual first commandment the Jews received as a nation, which was in Egypt, and they were told about HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem, creating a calendar that would be based on the seeing of the moon, the sighting of the moon. And Rashi's question is, why does the Torah, which is a book of laws, of commandments, why does it begin with stories? And Rashi says that there's an instruction here, there's a very important message that we have to convey, and that is, the nations of the world complain that the Jewish people have stolen the land of Israel. The nations of the world, not just the people who live there, the Canaanites, the nations of the world complain that we stole the land of Israel that we conquered. So our response to them is that God created the world and he gave it to Canaanites temporarily. They took it from them and gave it to us. In other words, the whole purpose of the book of Genesis, the Rebbe would often repeat over and over, was to teach the world that the land of Israel was given to the Jewish people and given to them for eternity. And therefore, we can't just decide we're going to give a piece of land of Israel for this reason or for that reason. But the Rebbe went a little deeper than that. The Rebbe explained, and I'm not going to go into the whole analysis, that the complaint of the nations of the world, which is bizarre because the nations of the world were not affected by our conquest of Israel, only the 7 Canaanite tribes. Why is everyone else complaining? Number 2, every country that we have today was a product of conquest of another nation. And that was a product of a conquest of another nation. So why are we so interested in understanding the conquest of Israel by the Jewish people? Why do the nations care, and why could they get away with charging that we stole the land when every land was taken by conquest? And the Rebbe explained that the way we conquered the land of Israel was qualitatively different from any other conquest, because every other conquest means that right now this nation, nation X, is in control of land Y. But there's always a potential that another nation will take control. So in effect, every person, every nation has a potential claim to every piece of real estate in the world, with one exception, the land of Israel. The land of Israel was given, as the Medrash puts it, tailor-made for the Jewish people. It fits no one else. No one else can colonize Israel and really make it effective and produce the milk, the honey, milk and honey, and all the other goodies that Israel is known for, and particularly human population. No one was able to make Israel to anything else. Why? Because once the land was given to us, it is our land for eternity, and we never lost control of that land. We never lost connections to that land. In fact, throughout history, there's no other analogy to this. We have never lost sight of our relationship with the land of Israel. In our prayers, repeatedly, we talk about returning to the land of Israel, returning to Yerushalayim, returning to the Beis HaMikdash. And this desire has not even ended. We still are praying for the full restoration of Jewish sovereignty over Israel, over the entire land of Israel, and the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. So our connection to Israel is totally different. We take it away from everyone else. There's no other potential for anyone else to get the land, only for the Jewish people, because this land is qualitatively a different piece of real estate, separate from any other part of the world. But then you could ask a question. True, Israel was given to us by God, and we can't just give it away. But no one is talking about just blithely giving it away randomly as if one doesn't care about it. We're talking about peace negotiations. So let me go a little bit more deeply into the Rebbe's approach to the peace process and to the idea of land for peace. Number 1, the Rebbe's primary argument against land for peace is that the only rational way to make peace between two adversaries is peace for peace. The whole concept of land for peace is ludicrous. Now, that doesn't mean that the Rebbe is against peace. The Rebbe was never against peace, and there's nothing more treasured by the Jewish people, and certainly by the Rebbe, as peace between Israel and all the nations. And that is something that we certainly will see coming to fruition with the coming of Mashiach. The Rebbe was not against peace with the Arabs. The Rebbe was against a fake peace, a peace that is not based on solid principles of common sense, rationality, and above all, Jewish law. Now, let's examine the source of this rejection of the peace process that has started with the return of Sinai to Egypt and the Camp David Accords and subsequent accords. The Rebbe's problem is based on a halacha, on a Jewish law, and the laws of Shabbos, of all places, in which it states that any city, any Jewish enclave that is surrounded by a hostile force that is only asking permission to enter into the Jewish community for the purpose of getting fodder for their animals. They just want supplies. They don't want to harm anyone, and if you don't allow them, they will attack. Jewish law says that you're allowed to initiate the attack, the resistance to them, even on Shabbos. And the only thing that overrides Shabbos is, of course, human life. And here we're allowing the Jewish soldiers living in that community to risk their lives and to break the Shabbos, as it were, in order to deflect the encroachment of this hostile force from entering into our territory for peaceful purposes, ostensibly. And the reason, the rationale behind that is because once they have access to strategic land, once they are within your borders, then it'll be very easy for them to conquer the land, and then you will not be able to defend yourself. So we're allowed to engage in a battle, which we know will cause loss of life. There are always casualties, and break the Shabbos to boot in order to not allow an enemy force, a potential enemy force, to enter into your territory. Every inch of land in Israel is strategic. Once the enemy can come in, they could wreak havoc. All we have to do is look at the terrorism that we experienced in the last few decades, where people who were living and situated within the boundaries, within the so-called green line of Israel, were able to wreak havoc through their terrorist activities. You don't want your enemy, you can't allow your enemy to be in your territory, and you're required to do everything in your power to resist them. That is the basic foundation of the Rebbe's resistance to the Camp David Accords. That's one of the arguments. Now, of course, someone will say, but we're doing it for peace. And maybe it's worthwhile sacrificing, giving up a piece of land for peace, because that will guarantee that we will not have to fight wars. And but maybe the land that we're giving up is not strategic. So who do we ask? What experts do we ask? And the Rebbe made it very clear, the experts that you have to ask are military experts who are currently involved in the military, and their only consideration is a security military situation, not political. Just like in the area of medicine, when you have a question about a certain treatment, you ask a physician. And you don't ask the physician who is part of the administration of a hospital who's concerned with economic issues, because then he's making his decision based on and colored by fiscal considerations, whereas the need for the doctor is to examine the patient and authorize treatment that is consistent with the patient's medical condition. And the Rebbe made it very clear that he has consulted with the generals both in Israel and the United States, and everyone agreed unequivocally that giving up any of the territory would undermine the security of Israel. It would be easier for the enemies to conquer the land of Israel. And the argument that now you don't need to come into the land of Israel, you could send rockets, is a ludicrous argument, because just because they can get us from far doesn't mean we should allow them to get us and harm us from near, which could even be more catastrophic because we can't prevent it as easily as something that comes from far. So the Rebbe's foundation of the resistance to the Camp David Accords is the idea that it is a matter of security, a matter of securing the lives of the millions of Jews. Now, the Rebbe was not only concerned with the Jewish inhabitants of Israel, although that's the primary concern as a Jewish leader, but he was also concerned with the well-being of the Arabs. The Rebbe made it clear that by this fake type of peace agreement, land for peace, which doesn't make any sense, it's not based on reality, it's not based on logic, it's not based on Torah, and it's just a sham, it's just a cover-up for the real intentions of the enemy to take advantage of us giving them land as a way of encroaching on our territory little by little until they can get rid of the entire state of Israel. But the Rebbe said he's not against the Arabs because it's for their security as well. If you have a fake peace, it'll only lead to war in which there will be many Arab casualties. In fact, the Rebbe's concern for the Arabs, as he had for every member of the human race, wherever they live, is underscored and exemplified by the fact that the Rebbe was against promoting birth control, population control of the Arabs. Of course, that would be a wonderful thing, you could argue, in terms of the security of Israel if there are no Arabs there. And the Rebbe says, no, that's a human requirement. It's one of the seven, not one of the seven actual Noahide commandments, but the spirit of the seven Noahide commandments is to not allow the world to remain desolate, but to populate the world. And if that is an imperative for every human being, it's an imperative for the Arabs as well. And therefore, the Rebbe was against anything to promote lower population amongst the Arabs. The Rebbe also emphasized very strongly spreading the message of the seven Noahide commandments to Arab towns and villages and cities. And there were efforts in that direction that were very successful. Many Arabs embraced the idea of the seven Noahide commandments. And I can't support this, I can't vouch for it, but this is what I heard, that whatever communities they were able to reach before the first Intifada with a message of the Rebbe about the seven Noahide commandments, those communities did not participate in the Intifada. In other words, the Rebbe was concerned for both the physical and the spiritual welfare of all the inhabitants of Israel, including the Arabs, but especially the Jewish people who are being threatened by all the different hostile forces that surround them. The Rebbe's response to those people who said, but there's American pressure, and the Rebbe argued that American pressure, to the extent that it might be real, is only limited because the United States does not want Israel to give in to pressure, because if it gives in to the initial amount of pressure, the Arabs will then pressure the United States to pressure Israel even more. And America wanted to be on good terms with the Arabs. In those days, they would try to have an even-handed approach to Israel and the Arabs, so they would have to force Israel to make more concessions, which the United States would be against. In fact, it was clear that when the Israeli government engaged in they called the disengagement or the expulsion, there were people in the United States government that were really very surprised and dismayed, but they couldn't do anything. President Bush reportedly said that he can't be more pro-Israel than Israel. But even before that, when Israel engaged in the giving up of land, some officials in the United States were very shocked, feeling that Israel was jeopardizing its own security. So what happens outwardly, that they'll be pressuring Israel, is not necessarily a reflection of what really is the interest of the United States. Another thing the Rebbe would emphasize, that right after the Six-Day War, the Arabs were in such a state of awe of the Jewish people, fearing that just as they had the intention of driving all the Israelis, all the Jews into the sea, that the Israelis would reciprocate and do the same thing. So they were willing to do whatever Israel would ask them to do. That was an opportune time to pay the Arabs to relocate. And instead of doing that, they encouraged those Arabs that were trying to relocate for nothing to come back so they can coexist. In other words, Israel took the great advantage we had in winning the Six-Day War and turned it into a deficit, because we gave the Arabs the sense that they even though they lost the battle, they have not lost the war, and they could still resist, and that led to all the different terrible agreements, including and especially the agreement that was the Oslo, known as the Oslo tragedy. That led to the deaths of well over 1,000 people. Anyone with any intelligence realized that Yasser Arafat was not interested in peace, that this was just a ploy, and no matter what Israel would promise him, which is more than anyone could have imagined, he was not willing to accept it. And yet Israel, many people within Israel are prepared to give more territory. When they went through the expulsion of the Jews from Gaza, what did we get in return? Tens of thousands of rockets. And to this day, that is the greatest threat. That is the greatest threat, together with Hezbollah. But that's another point. Hezbollah was created, or at least was given the power that it never had before, because of Israel's reticence, because of Israel's hesitation to do what it had to do. Menachem Begin started this campaign in Lebanon to oust the Palestinians, the PLO, and they stopped. And actually they were hailed by the many Iranian-backed Shiite Muslims living in Lebanon, because they were being tormented by the PLO. So they were happy with the Israeli forces. The Israeli forces would be their liberators. But when Israel stopped and didn't do anything, it turned them into an enemy force, because Israel has become an occupier, just like the PLO was. So not only did they not destroy the PLO, which they had the ability to do, they also encouraged and perhaps created a greater resistance than ever before, which today Israeli officials will tell you is the most serious threat. Hezbollah has hundreds of thousands of rockets poised to strike at any point in the land of Israel. So in short, the Rebbe's position is Israel is first and foremost the land that was given to the Jewish people irrevocably. It's a land that we cannot give away. But if the argument is we should give it away because it will protect human lives, Jewish lives, Israeli lives, that argument is specious, because on the contrary, Jewish law says that when you give up strategic territory, it is what will invite a greater struggle and a war in which there will be many more casualties. So to save lives, you have to resist any attempt to give up strategic land, which includes virtually everything in Israel. Everything that we now have control over, which includes what they call the West Bank, Yehuda and Shomron, and of course the Golan Heights. The Rebbe's position has never changed, because the Rebbe's position is based on Torah, and the Rebbe would always emphasize that what's based on Torah cannot change. Yes, circumstances can change, but the Torah's approach to these issues is solid and not subject to any change. It is my fervent hope that by Israel being strong, not only will it not lose supporters and its relationship with other nations, what's interesting is that even though Netanyahu is not exactly as strong as we would want him to be, as the Rebbe would have suggested and advocated, nevertheless, his stance is much more rigid than his detractors, who argue that if he's going to maintain his rigidity, it's going to isolate Israel. Israel will have no connection to any of the other countries of the world, which could be very dangerous for Israel, politically, economically, socially, and militarily. And what happened? Israel now has better relations with more countries than ever before, whether it's China, Japan, India, whether it's the African countries, whether it's South America, and even Europe, which is always going through a mixed bag of ambivalence towards Israel, pro and con. But what's most surprising is that even the Arab countries, yes, for ulterior motives, they're afraid of Iran, but the Arab countries are coming closer to Israel, something that we could never have foreseen, which is one of the signs that we're living in Messianic times. So by being strong and firm and not compromising, you demonstrate to the enemy that this is not negotiable, and if it's not negotiable, they will be forced to accept some accommodation and peace that will be to the satisfaction of everyone. May Hashem help that we should have true peace in the land of Israel, which will come through our own efforts of being strong and maintaining the security and integrity of Israel, together with the integrity of the Jewish people, together with the integrity of Torah. And this will lead us to the ultimate redemption, when we will have a world of peace, a world of godly light permeating all of existence.